Let's get right into it. We are in part 2 of a relatively brief series that we're going to do this summer on money and wealth and priorities. And it's called Treasure. This is part 2, and we're going to work through certain texts through the Gospel of Matthew. And today's passage is actually an incredibly profound passage. I can do a whole series just on this passage. And really, it's not even just about specific temptations. It's a question of what is Jesus doing for us. In this passage, Jesus is a whole new kind of Adam, a whole new kind of humanity. And the first Adam was tempted and tested in the garden. He was in paradise, but the new Adam, Jesus, is tempted through actually darn near starvation at an incredible portion of weakness in the wilderness. I mean, it's an incredible contrast. Now, I can't go through all of that today. What we're really going to just look at today is this first temptation. This first temptation in these first 4 verses. I mean, just quickly, the first temptation is really about bread, and bread is more than about bread. It's really about what provides the very most necessary thing for life itself. And often, really, it comes back to a lot of us, it comes back to wealth. It comes back to money, right? So the first one, bread, is really about, and I'll get into this in a bit more about money. The second one, the temptation, is really about position and power. Aren't you the Son of God? You can just call angels to do. It's about position. It's a temptation toward grasping position and power. And the third one is about rule and reign in the kingdom and all the glories of the world. And those are the different temptations that Jesus is being offered, and a pathway for him to grasp instead of what it means to be a human being under God in the image of God. Now today, let's just get at the first one in a message I've entitled Hunger, Fear, and Temptation, which is very relevant to our series about money and wealth. And let me get at it in 3 parts. Part 1, hunger, fear, and the loss of bread. Hunger, fear, and the loss of bread. Part 2, the temptation for control and a life of self-sufficiency. So this is where we tend to go. First, we have you may have gone through a time in your life and you go into a wilderness. And then you think your next meal is uncertain and maybe you don't have a next meal. And then we're afraid of this, and then, you know what, I'm not going to lose control of my life. And so there's a temptation. And that temptation, and this is a temptation I think that is powerful to me, that we must wrestle with in this passage. It's a temptation for control and a life of self-sufficiency. But there's an answer that Jesus offers here, and that is that really what we need to live is not by bread, more than bread, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And that's part 3, that there is a word that comes from God. And that is, there's a word of God who is himself the bread of life. Okay? The word of God who is the bread of life. Okay? You following me here? Okay, let's get into first part 1. Hunger, fear, and the loss of bread. If you go into this passage, this is before Jesus really starts his ministry. He goes into the wilderness, and really what he's doing is he is recapitulating, he is reliving in himself the whole life of God's people. God's people were chosen by him, and then before they were called into the promised land, really they had to fight in a wilderness. And I want to just stop for a moment. This is the human condition. The human condition, I know that we live in one of the nicest places in the world to live. I mean, we have perfect weather here. That the houses literally cost, the house that will cost $100,000 somewhere else here literally costs $1 million here. I mean, it's an insane place, okay? And there might be more wealth concentrated in this city. I mean, it's crazy. The sheer amount of wealth that's concentrated in this city it probably rivals, like you can add up all the wealth of history, and really it's like, it's crazy, this place where we live in. And a lot of us, we're just trying to get by in living in this wild place called the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. But actually, what is the norm of human life is wilderness. The norm of human life is not comfort. It's not wealth. It's not like everything's going to work and I'm going to go to this school and I'm going to have great health. I'm not going to get cancer when I'm 40 years old. And my wife isn't going to have some kind of like bad condition. And my children are, of course, going to turn out perfect. And then I'm going to go to a great school. And then I'm going to work hard. And I will be in control. And I'll always be able to get bread. And I'll never be hungry. This is what we think. But the norm of life is wilderness. And wilderness has danger. There are dangerous animals in the wilderness. You do not know if this ground is fertile and we're going to get food. You do not know if there's going to be some kind of famine and we're going to starve on the other side of this hill. We're trying to get through this wilderness. We're trying to get to a better land, a land, as the way the Bible promised, a land filled with milk and honey, and where God will reign and will be provided for, and there'll be peace. We will not be killed by the other people. We will not hate each other. It will be a land of plenty. And that is what Jesus is doing here. He's recapitulating the promises of God. He's carrying on and going through exactly what the chosen people of God, but where they failed. And this is, in one sense, it's not just the chosen people of God. It's where all human life fails. We look at the world. We see that it's a dangerous wilderness. And Jesus, He is Himself God. And I want you to just think about this before you even got this ministry. Before Jesus goes out and just starts healing people with power, before He has all the knowledge and He's going to preach them because He's like the greatest preacher that's ever been, and He's the greatest preacher that's ever been, and after He preaches, He'll heal you of your disease. I mean, I can't do those things. But before He does those things with power, you know what He decides to do? He will go and say, I will walk with you. I know your condition. I came to be with you in all your hurt and all your danger. And I will show you that if you'll walk with me, that I know how to go through this wilderness. This is the very first thing Jesus said. Why is Jesus in the wilderness? To walk with us in hurt, through the danger, through hunger. Now, just stop for a moment here. He has been fasting for 40 days. Anybody here ever fasted for a day? You don't have to raise your hand, but just answer. I have fasted multiple times in my life, and mostly it's a day. Okay, it's a day. And after about the halfway through the day, it is not fun. It's like 2 meals. Usually, I regularly don't eat breakfast, so that's no big deal. But at about 3 o'clock, when there has been no lunch, you know what you mainly think about? You do not think about your work. You do not think about TV. You just look at the potato chips in the corner and you're like, oh gosh, that's what you think about. At least that's me anyway, okay? And it is hard. And I have been told by people who are more, tougher than I am, and they have fasted, they say the first day after 2 meals, that's when you start feeling it. The second day is very, very painful. And the third day you get very weak, but then the hunger kind of goes away. And then you can go a whole week, and then your body recalibrates. But then around the second week, it gets really hard again. It just starts like incredible hurt, and your mind just goes to food all the time. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is Jesus did this for 40 days. And by the way, I won't go into all the theology of it. It's 40 days because it was 40 years in the wilderness. It was 40 days because that's how many days God used to destroy all humankind, almost all humankind through the flood. Jesus enduring every piece of curse and wrath and loss and death and danger. That's why it's 40 days. But there's also just simply a physiological reason for 40 days, because you get out to 40 days and you don't eat. Jesus here, so this is, understand, He is the Almighty Son of God. But He has allowed Himself into the weakness of our humanity. And in His humanity, He has allowed Himself to go to the very, very, we're talking this close to death. You get to 40 days, you eat or you die. That's what it's about. This is where He is. So we're talking about And I know for those of you who may grow in the church, it's just an interesting Bible story. For those of you who may not grow in the church, it's a completely insane story. Why would anybody get to 40 days? And now, the last person you ever want to talk to shows up, the devil. And notice that his temptation does not sound like an evil thing. It's not like, he shows up with his horns and he looks like an obviously evil figure. Notice the thing he says to you seems eminently reasonable. You have power. You're the Son of God. You have power. Take these rocks. Boom. Just go boom. Bread. And eat. And you will stop suffering. And Jesus, now, some of you are wondering, why didn't he just do that? Now, if you and I have the power to do that, and you're at a place of hunger, wouldn't we do it? We would just do it. Now, first let me just give you the reason why he didn't do it. Number one, that's not his calling. His calling is to walk with us in hunger and in hurt. Not to use his divine power and prerogative to just fix things, which that's kind of most of what we want. The divine God came down to show us the deepest part of what it means to be God by being weak with us. And then he showed us how we can live and face the wilderness. So in these next words, these very important words, this is the power of how you deal with this temptation. Now, what's the temptation? You're like, it doesn't seem like temptation. If you're hungry, you should eat, right? It just seems like a stupid thing that Jesus is doing. It's very, very deep. Now, let me ask you a second question here. Bread is not just bread. Hunger isn't just hunger. Now, what does hunger represent? Hunger literally represents dying. Because if you're hungry, your body is giving you feedback saying, we're weak and we're crumbling here. And if this keeps up, because pain is a feedback in life. You understand that? We all understand. If something starts hurting inside your body's saying something is wrong. Something is wrong. Hunger, most of you, we tend to think we put hunger in one category and pain in another category, but try fasting for a little while. You will not put them in two separate categories. Pain and hunger, you'll realize hunger is pain. That's what hunger is. But hunger also represents something more than that, because you and I know that we do not hunger only from our body. We hunger for more than a deeper place in our body. At the deepest place in our life, we hunger for things like meaning, purpose, truth, beauty, love, mercy, acceptance. See all these things? And all these, what hunger means is not, the body, the human body, this physicality that we live, I don't know if most of you can understand this, but most of us live at this very literal, physical, material life, and we think this is life. This is kind of how our secular culture thinks. This is what's real. What's real is the physical, this thing. And the food, this is tangible. But actually, the Bible flips it around. Actually, this is sort of the symbolic thing, and the real thing is the other thing. The deeper food is not the physical food that you eat. That will take care of the hunger in your body, the pain that your body is saying, we need something. There's a problem here. But your deeper person, your soul, your heart, your mind, has a hunger. And it needs to be fed. And if you ignore that, like all pain in life, if you ignore pain, you will pay for it. There's a pain, I'm just tough enough. I don't think it matters. We'll just ignore that pain, we'll ignore that pain, and we do this. And then, some of you guys, I'm one of these guys that don't go to a doctor. One of these days, You ignore pain, your body doesn't feel good, and then you go to a doctor, and then they say, it's cancer. And if you had come 6 months ago or a year ago, I think we could have saved your life. But now it's pretty late stage, and you're going to die. That's what hunger is. Hunger is a kind of pain. And you know what bread is? It's the thing that feeds the hunger. It's the thing that gives life. And in life, bread isn't just this physical stuff we eat. There's more bread than we need than bread. Now, let me just flip the metaphor a little bit. Most of us know at this very most bare bones thing, all human society have had to deal with the fact, it's a fact, that we live in a wilderness. Now, some places it's a little harder. You live in a jungle, that's one kind of wilderness. A desert is another kind of wilderness. The Eskimos live in a very cold wilderness. Okay? And you can live in a place with great weather and incredibly fertile soil like California, and it's a more comfortable wilderness, and yet you're under the threat of hunger. You and I are under the threat of hunger. Isn't that true? Isn't that true? You and I live here in this place. I mean, maybe you and I are not the richest people, among the richest people that have ever walked this planet, but this area is. And this is how we get jobs, and this is why we have such fancy houses, and that's why we have all this great food and great economy out here and so forth, and why even despite the fact it's expensive, more and more people come, because there's opportunity here. And yet, at this most basic level, if you lose your job, you know that at some point you could lose your house. And then if you lose your house, then you can't even put food on the table. And that very, very basic thing, you know that if you starve, you will die. You, your wife, your children, your family, you die. And then we start dying of other things too. We lack food, and we can't pay for the rent or the mortgage or the clothes or the tuition or the piano lessons or whatever it is that you feel that we need. We start to lack these things, and then inside your hunger the pain starts getting bigger, because then we start suffering things like shame and fear. Fear of death, fear of shame. And shame is like a death, right? Have you ever been there? And so, at the most basic place is bread. But nowadays, it isn't really bread that we think about. We think of the way you get bread. And literally, in our culture, bread is a metaphor for what? Money. Money. What is this passage talking about? You think it's talking about bread? It's talking about money. It is talking about, actually, it's trying to point us to the reality that hunger is more than physical hunger. But then, how do we try to go answer the thing for hunger? It is money. Money. So that's part one. The subject matter is weird. You just making that up, Pastor? Are you sure you're making that up? Let's go to part two, all right? Most of us, look, money is not a bad thing. And let me just say this really straight up. Money is a good thing. Let me just say that. Money is good. So people have all kinds of strange relationships with money, but money is an incredibly practical thing. Do you want to like lug a bunch of sheep down to the store so you could trade them for carrots or something like that? That's kind of the old school way of doing it. Do you want to bring bread so that you can like, hey, can you kill that cow? But we only want the leg, and we'll show up with the bread that we grew. So the way the world solved this issue is this incredibly great invention called money. And so money's good. And yet, where the temptation is if you, so let's change the subject a little bit here. Jesus was starving for bread. Have you ever been in a time when you were starving for money? The bread is about money, right? You ever gone into a wilderness and you feared loss of money or loss of the ability to make money? And then you go, you know exactly what that means. Debt piles up, and you'll be kicked out, and all these other things. All the dangers of the wilderness is now right upon you. That's what's going on here. And I want to ask you this simple question. Now, if you're a Christian, you already know the answer to this thing, but where does the money come from? Where does the money come from? And the normal answer is, well, from me. I studied, I went to school, I got some skills. I mean, I ended up getting a job that was like completely not related to my major. And I don't know why that guy hired me, but he gave me a chance. And, you know, that's like kind of our stories, right? But now, like, I have a skill, and our society values this skill to a certain level, whatever it is, whether you work in the public sector, private sector, whatever you do, and they give you money for it. You know, like, you know, if you can take a round ball and throw it into a hoop 40% of the time from 35 feet away, you will make, you know, $20 million or $40 million. That's what he made, right? Isn't that what Steph Curry made? You can make $40 million a year, but in our culture, you know, if you're like a really good teacher, that will make, I don't know, $50,000 a year. You can get an idea of like our valuations here, right? But is that really where your money comes from? The answer is, well, it comes from God. Really? That seems like a really kind of religion-y, kind of like cheap answer. Really? Is it? There's a Bible pastor named Martin Luther. You might have heard about him. Really, just a little bit famous pastor from the 16th century, kind of changed history. And this is the way Martin Luther put it. I'll just paraphrase the way he put it. He says, "Did you really get the bread from that you eat off the table? Didn't first God have to provide the seed, the grain? And didn't He have to provide the soil in which that grain would go? And then didn't He have to provide the rain and the sun so that that grain would grow just perfectly well? And then didn't He have to provide the seasons so that, all the bugs wouldn't come and destroy that grain before it would sprout? And then didn't He have to provide you a guy called the farmer who has the wisdom and the knowledge, and he wakes up at crazy hours to sow and to reap, and now can take that grain and then didn't He have to provide back then it would have to be a horse carriage guy to take the grain from that far off country to your city. And today we would call him a truck driver, but back then, it was like who would deliver. And then didn't God have to provide the smarts for all these people to provide a market? And then didn't He have to provide a person who has this knowledge called a baker? He buys that grain, and then, he makes this thing, and then he puts it into this thing called an oven, makes bread, and then he offers you a fair price, and you can use this thing called money, which you made some other way, which God gave you some other way, and then you get to eat bread. Are you in control of any of the rest of that? Who is in control of all that? Well, the economy is in control of all that. The government's in control of all that. The businessmen are in control. Really? Really? Are they really, really in control of all those things? Really? Before the farmer ever even got to really do much, maybe he could just start. He has to at least have the knowledge to pick the right thing to plant. But you know what he does while it's in the ground? Pretty much nothing. The farmer, he maybe sets up some other ground, maybe he pulls some weeds or something like that. But actually, do you know that farming can be done without even doing all that? The yield won't be as good. But you could just throw all these seeds out there, and this is kind of the way farming was back then. They would throw these seeds out there, and the farmer would do a whole lot of nothing. Nothing. Who's at work when it's in there? God. Let me use a little bit more of a modern example. A couple years ago, I was listening to a Planet Money podcast. Some of you guys listen to Planet Money on NPR. It's a great podcast. Teaches you about money and the economy. And they were telling me something that was news to me, which is, do you know that the world's rice trade, the market for rice around the world, do you know that whole governments control that market? You know why they try to control? They try to control it. But there have been years when certain bugs and famine and bad weather have hit, and the sheer amount of rice in the world drops. And then you know what happens to those governments? They get really, really panicky. Because you know what rice is? Rice is just bread. In our culture, bread is life. But in another culture, it's not the exact same food, it's rice. But countries like, China, billion plus people, India, Thailand, Korea, Japan, you name it. You pretty much all the other Asian, you know what? They want a controlled market. You know why the governments do that? You know why all the leaders of the governments do that? Because they know that if there's a shortage of rice, and if the rice price spikes, that there will be riots. There'll be riots. That people will get violent. And they could get killed. Literally, they could get killed. The government will be overthrown, and there could be a violent overthrow of their government. And so you think they're really in control? They're trying to be in control. And in most years, you know who helps all these governments stay stable? God. It's God. It's God who gives the weather. It's God who doesn't have like tsunamis there or hurricanes and certain famine things. It's God. Now let me take you to a very important portion of Scripture. Some of you are thinking, this is really about money? Oh, it's about money. I want you to go to, if you want to go in your Bible, you can go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. This is the important verse. How Jesus teaches us to fight the lie and temptation, control it. Oh, every government is trying to control it, and it's not unwise. You should try to put up some kind of control. But here's the point. Are you really, really in control? There's a portion that you and I are responsible for, but the vast majority of it, we can't control. The fact is, you can go into an industry today. It's a great industry. You can get your skills very, very high up. And then in 15 or 20 years, they decide, we don't need to pay you $150,000 because the guy in India has the same skill as you. He's younger, and we could pay him pennies on the dollar compared to you. Boom, you're out. Are you in control of that? Are you in control? You are not in control of these things. So, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, now just a quick background on Deuteronomy 4. It's verse 3. Now, it's not Deuteronomy 4. No, Deuteronomy 8. Sorry. It's verse 3 onward. It's in Deuteronomy 8. And it's a warning that Moses gives before they go into the promised land, where they're going to have a land flowing with milk and honey, and they're going to become wealthy and comfortable. It's a warning, though. And in verse 3 it says this, He that is God humbled you, this is while they're in the wilderness, and let you hunger and fed you with manna. For those of you who didn't grow up knowing the Bible, manna was literally like just bread that God just like rained down from the sky, and they'd wake up and they'd eat it. Isn't that nice? You don't even have to farm it. Just wake up and just there's food. Okay, thank you. Right? That's what God did. But He let them hunger. Then He gave them manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. And this is why God let them be hungry, and just fed them with manna. That He, God, might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord, Yahweh. That's what Jesus is quoting. Let's jump ahead here just for time's sake. Okay, verse 10. You shall eat and be full. This is in the new land. And you shall bless the Lord, bless Yahweh. That's the reason it's capital L-O-R-D. It's Yahweh, Yahweh your God, for the good land He has given you. And then listen to the warning. Take care lest you forget Yahweh your God by keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I commanded you today. Lest you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them. And when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied. You know what that's like? That's ancient Israelite language for, and when you are rich, when you don't feel so insecure, when your 401k is in good shape, when you're paying down your mortgage and your children are healthy and you have more than enough food from Costco, right? That's kind of like, that's Old Testament language for that, right? When you're in that place, verse 14, then your heart be lifted up and you forget Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the place where they don't know God. Out of the house of slavery where they beat you down because they don't care about God. Verse 15, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness, which is the world, with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground, where there was no where there was no water, and brought you water out of the flinty rock. That God did that too. He just like rock just flowed out of a rock back then. Who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. Let's just stop there for a moment. He lets us go through these hard things. You ever had a place where your job was insecure, or your next paycheck was unsure, or you've been laid off, or you're not sure if you're going to have a good job out of college, or you don't know where your future's at? And then, I don't know, maybe for some of you who've lived for a while, and for those of you younger brothers and sisters, I encourage you to talk to older brothers and sisters, maybe your parents, maybe your aunts and uncles, maybe people in their 50s and 60s right in this church, and ask them, have you ever been through a time like this? And then they will tell you, oh yes, they will smile, and they'll tell you of a story how God made water come out of a rock. How God gave them a job that they had absolutely no business getting in an absolute terrible recession when everybody else was trying to get that job. They were one of the worst people qualified for that job, and God gave them that job. By grace. You know what that is? That's water flowing straight out of a rock. And God will do that for you and for me in the wilderness if He's your God and you turn to Him. Verse 17, beware, here's a warning, lest you say in your heart, of course we don't say this out loud, we don't come to church, we don't say this part out loud, we just say this inside, okay? Lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. I worked hard for this, I made this money. Right? You shall remember Yahweh your God, for it is He who gives you the power to get wealth, that He may confirm His covenant that He swore to your fathers as it is to this day. And if you forget Yahweh your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. You're going to die. You're going to find out that all these other hungers they cannot give you. They can't give you truth and mercy and love and forgiveness. You will die. Like the nations that Yahweh makes to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of Yahweh your God. You think it was about money? The whole chapter 8, is about wealth and money. And where is the power for it? And Jesus quoting, not by bread, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord, Yahweh. Let me close with my message. There is every word that comes from the mouth of God. There's a word that came from God. It's the greatest word that ever came. John chapter 1 puts it this way. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that Word came into the flesh. In other words, He came here, into the wilderness, into the danger, into the midst of hunger. Can you imagine the man Jesus, that Word that became flesh, who was with God, who is God, is Jesus. And if you go a little farther into John chapter 6, he says this extraordinary thing. This is what he says. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. This is John 6:35. You can look it up if you want. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. He goes on to say, verse 38, for I've come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. See, I didn't just come and just go snap my fingers and just fix things. I came to walk with you. I came to show you how to defeat the lies of the devil. It isn't just by your power or the lies that you're gonna start telling yourself just because Deuteronomy 8, but actually, if you will depend on every word that comes from the mouth of God, and I'm the greatest word that came from Him, and I'm the bread of life. And we came and we needed hunger. We hungered for meaning, and He gave us His kingdom and His purpose. We hungered for mercy, and He shed His blood so He could wash us of our sins. And we hungered for something just worthy to give our lives to, and He says, I'm a servant God, a lowly God, who will die for you. I'm worthy of your trust. And then we say, but I need a job. and I need food. And my kids, I don't know, they need a place to sleep. And He says, and I'll provide those things too. I give to you. I'm the bread. That's Jesus. Will you believe that? I know many of you, maybe you're in a wilderness now. Maybe you're in a wilderness now. Maybe you will soon be in a wilderness. And I hope you'll remember, before the money, not the money. It's not that the money is bad, but the money is not your deepest bread. You understand? It's the one who gives you the bread to fill your deepest hungers. He Himself is the bread of life. He is the Word that came from God that we need to take in, whose life. Trust in Him. Turn to Him. Find your deepest security in Him. Defeat the fear from Him. Let Him fill your hunger. And you throw away and tell the devil to get lost in and with Him. Let's pray.